When we think about ancient empires, our minds usually go to huge monuments, right? Things like the pyramids or the Colosseum. But what if the greatest piece of engineering from one of the biggest empires ever wasn't a building at all? Today, we're going to dive into the invisible architecture, the political and logistical operating system that let the massive Persian Empire not just conquer, but actually last.
So let's just start with the core problem, and believe me, it is a massive one. I want you to imagine you're the person in charge of an empire that stretches from what we now call Libya all the way over to the Indus River. We're talking 2 million square miles, packed with dozens of different cultures, languages, and religions. How in the world do you hold something that huge together without it just instantly shattering into a million pieces?
And to really get a feel for the scale here, just look at this number. At its absolute peak, the Persian Empire was home to an estimated 44% of the entire world's population. Just let that sink in for a second. No empire, not before or since, has ever governed that big of a slice of humanity. It's an almost unimaginable challenge from an administrative point of view.
And that gets us right to the fundamental danger. Look, conquering territory, winning battles and all that, that's one thing. You can almost say that's the easy part. But actually administering it, that is the real test. Because without a brilliant system in place, an empire this size doesn't just stop growing. It fractures, it rebels, and it eventually just collapses into total chaos.
And this is where the architect of the solution comes into the picture, Darius the Great. Now, he wasn't just another king with a big army. He was a true visionary, an innovator. He totally understood that military power alone was never going to be enough. The empire needed a sophisticated, efficient system, a kind of grand design to actually function and survive for the long haul.
This quote, it just perfectly captures his mindset. Darius didn't look at his empire and just see a random collection of places he'd conquered. No, he saw a single, integrated state. His whole focus shifted from pure expansion to something way, way harder, creating stability, efficiency, and real, lasting control.
Okay, so what's the very first problem Darius had to tackle? It's the tyranny of distance. I mean, think about it. If a rebellion kicks off on the far side of the empire, how does the king even find out about it in time, let alone get his army there? He realized that information had to travel faster than chaos could spread.
And this slide just shows you the revolutionary leap forward that he achieved. Before Darius, a critical message could take up to 3 months to cross the empire. By the time that message arrived, a small protest would be a full-blown war. But by building the royal road, Darius slashed that travel time down to as little as 7 days. This wasn't just a small improvement, it was a total game changer for imperial control.
So how on earth did he do it? Well, the genius wasn't just the road itself, it was the system he built on top of it. As you can see here, it was basically a relay. He set up way stations about a day's ride apart from each other. A messenger would gallop to a station, leap off his tired horse, hand the message to a fresh rider with a fresh horse, who would then race to the next one. It was a 1,700-mile-long relay race, the ancient world's internet, and it ran 24/7. It ensured that, as the historian Herodotus famously wrote, neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night could stop the flow of information.
Okay, so communication is solved. Awesome. But that leads us to the next massive challenge: diversity. How do you govern all these different groups of people, each with their own laws, gods, and traditions, without them constantly trying to break away? Trying to force everyone to become Persian was just never going to fly.
Darius's brilliant solution was the satrap system. He chopped the empire up into provinces, or satrapies, and each one was run by a governor, called a satrap. This guy was basically the king's regional manager, his eyes, ears, and hands on the ground, whose job was to keep the peace and make sure everyone stayed loyal.
And the real genius of this system, which this table shows so well, is all about balance. See, satraps were given a lot of local freedom. They could run their own courts, oversee local projects, respect local customs. But, and this is a big but, the ultimate levers of power always stayed with the king. Darius commanded the military, he personally appointed every satrap, and, this part is brilliant, he sent out secret royal inspectors, literally known as the king's eyes and ears, to spy on the satraps and make sure they weren't getting too powerful or corrupt. It was just a masterful balance of giving people freedom while keeping a firm grip on control.
So we have fast communication and we have a clever system for governing. But there's one more huge problem we have to solve. How do you pay for all of it? I mean, the royal road, a giant army, the whole bureaucracy of satraps and inspectors, this stuff costs an absolute fortune.
Before Darius, the empire kind of ran on tribute.
which basically meant conquered people would give the king random gifts, hoping it would keep him happy. It was totally unpredictable and super inefficient. So Darius replaced all of that with something truly revolutionary: the world's first system of standardized, predictable taxation. Each province was assessed based on what it could produce, and it had to pay a fixed amount every single year.
What this did was create a stable, reliable stream of money that let the empire have an actual budget. And as this chart shows, that money wasn't just sitting in a vault somewhere. It was the fuel for the entire imperial engine. It paid for infrastructure like the royal road. It paid the salaries of the professional army. And it maintained that whole administrative machine that kept the empire humming along.
So the crucial point here is that these three systems didn't just work on their own. They were a perfectly interlocking machine. The royal road let the king keep an eye on the satraps. The satraps collected the taxes that paid to maintain the road. The taxes paid for the army that protected the whole system. It was this brilliant, self-reinforcing loop of power and stability.
And all of this leaves us with a really fascinating final thought. We tend to remember empires for their big battles and their charismatic generals. But the story of Darius the Great suggests something very different. That maybe the true foundation of lasting power isn't the sword, but the system. Not just conquest, but communication, logistics, and really good administration. Maybe the real secret to building an empire that lasts isn't found on the battlefield, but in the ancient equivalent of a spreadsheet.